It is 4 o'clock. Calling to order the September EIC meeting, and I'll open us with a prayer. Dear God, we thank you for today in this beautiful place where we live. We thank you for the children, families, and everyone that is living, working, and playing in Kerrville. Please come to us when we're making decisions about the future quality of life and the future growth and development of Kerrville, and lead us in the right direction. In your name we pray, amen. Okay. Anyone signed up for Visitors and Citizens Forum? Item 4A, approval of the minutes from last month. I apologize for not being here. It was very last minute, and I didn't give Celeste hardly any time. So thank you for graciously taking my spot within probably 5 minutes or less of notice. My son had COVID, and I didn't want to be too close to you guys just in case it was going around. So I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes if there are no changes.
If I can, I don't know, since I read them.
You can. You have a motion?
I'll second.
And a second. All in favor, please let me know by raising your hand. And on item 5A, you will notice that Gil and Katie are not with us. They are, where are they, Michael?
They're at the annual IEDC conference in Colorado. Yep, so they are both in attendance of
They're
that.
in a cooler
Shagging
place
down
than
business. And
So we'll get to hear about that next month.
yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. That means that you're up again with item 5B, an update for our projects.
Actually, I have a presentation for you today. Kind of a big one. Martin's back there, right? Yeah, he is. I heard him. Just give me a second here. Go. So I thought about it, and I was like, I just give you guys a list all the time to stare at and nothing ever to look at. So I apologize for that, and we'll start doing something a little more robust for the project updates. So we'll go over quality of life bond projects first, and then go through the list of just everything else that you all have funded that is not a part of that sales tax bond project. So just as a refresher, and for those of you that are new, the $20 million bond project put together funding for repairs of the Cali roof and some structural pieces to it, funding for the Olympic pool renovation, Scott Schreiner Golf Course, the AC Schreiner House, Granger McDonald Park, and miscellaneous park funds, which actually came through already. And as you might remember, those were Kerrville Schreiner Park and Guadalupe Park playground equipment pieces. And that should cover just about all of that $20 million right there. So first up on this list, the Cali Theater. Bids were publicized in the paper on the 21st of August. We were going to open bids on the 17th. We pushed that back one more week, and we're going to open those on the 24th. The bid award should be at City Council on the 8th of October at the first meeting in October. And construction is still planned for commencement in March of 2024. I think the last event that that Playhouse 2000 has scheduled is the first weekend in March, and so we're going to close it down right after that, and then it'll be closed down for anywhere between 3 to 5 months for the construction and renovation to the roof and end of that. So
You already decide where you're going to move
25.
the election, the May
25.
municipal election?
No, that's still in discussion at this
Regional.
point, but yes, that's certainly on all of our radars right now. The Olympic pool, we are still in design. We have schematic designs that we have received. I'm always reluctant to show that until we get a little further along in the process, because it's always going to change. In that schematic design, there were a few things in there that will probably be add alternates to the project. They weren't necessary, they were niceties. As an example, we have a men's and women's locker room, right? Currently, anybody who's been out there, you go in, there's the men's, women's locker rooms. There's discussion about using this as a pool for swim teams, right? And so there was some discussion and inclusion of like a team locker room for the men's and the women's team. That is very much a nicety, and almost no civic pools have a separate like team locker room. You'll have university pools, but essentially when the swim teams are going to be there, the public isn't really going to be there, and so there's no need to kind of double up on that. And so we're trying to make sure that we are in line with all the things that we want to get out of that, but they are kind of pricey. So that's probably the only big alternate that we took off at this point. So we should get some more stuff in November, and then closure is still set for next year with the anticipated opening for the summer of '26.
Will that be open to the public, that review on November the 4th? Or that's
No, ma'am.
No, because
No,
you're so
ma'am. This is
far
all
away from
internal.
that.
This is just us meeting with the designer and just kind of going over budget and design components. So once we get to the design development stage, in this stage, I think we'll be close enough that we can start showing kind of here's some rough renderings. Scott Schreiner Golf Course. So as y'all know, this is the 100th anniversary, and I think when we started this conversation, we tried to get the renovations done for this year to be in concert with the 100th year anniversary. It didn't work. We were going to be stuck with a very limited group of contractors because they schedule this out pretty far in advance as far as the green renovation goes, and that's a specific skill set. Kind of like the pool, it's not a normal thing, right? So you want to give yourself enough time. So right now, we have completed several of the projects for the phase 1. So we've done some work on the maintenance building, the renovation to that, overhead doors, pump at the waterfall there, maintenance area and parking lot improvements. We're working with MC Fonseca, and that should begin pretty soon. And Streets is going to work on some of this internally. So we're outsourcing some, and we're trying to internalize and do that which we can and we normally would do. The green and course renovation piece, which is kind of the big chunk of this, City Council authorized staff to execute the contract with the #1 selection. And so we're in that process right now. And so we're hopeful that we get that thing signed and ready to go. And we will either be closed in January or depending on when they could start, we might push it into December a little bit. But it's the holiday. Not a lot of areas are going to start a project a week before Christmas and then pause and then come back. It'll make more sense probably just to start in January and go. So we're still excited about all the schedules for those first 3 projects. AC Schreiner House, so this is for the Heart of the Hills Heritage Center. Those bids were put out on the 21st of last month. They're going to open on the 24th, and then our hope is that we award the bid on the October 8th meeting for council. So this is a design build project. So the city is under contract with Marksman Engineers to both design and to construct this project. So it's a method that we use. We've used it for the public safety facility and for this project. And so we are excited. We should get those numbers soon. Actually, I think this week is what I'm hoping for. And I'm really hopeful because this one, as you all know, is it was on a tight budget, right? And construction commencement, I think, March of 24. That's a typo. That is a typo.
You think?
Completion of construction for this will be December of 25. I was doing this kind of all the way up until, yeah, please don't delete that last bullet point there. Okay, Granger McDonald Park. So this project is currently in the design phase. There was a kickoff meeting and several of the EIC board members were there at that one. So we had city staff, Parks and Recs Advisory Board, UGRC representation. Tara Bushnell from UGRA was also at the meeting, and the city's engineer for this is Hewitt Engineering. You all know he's done several of the projects around the river. So we had a kickoff meeting. There was a lot of robust discussion. It was a good conversation. We gave John some good direction on where to go. And so hopefully he'll be back at the end of this month or early October with some design choices to kind of talk through on what can be done. And we are hopeful for all that that's going to bring to us. And so that one it's tracking I think the way that we all expected to from a timeline standpoint. And I look forward to getting a chance to sit down with John and talk through what those options are going to look like. So this one, as you all remember, or if you remember, this one is going to be for, walking boats into that river, right? So this isn't going to be your traditional boat dock that we have across the street, which we have two, right? So this is taking your sailboats and walking those in there, and also for folks to jump off and to kind of ease in to the river. So it's going to be really cool. I actually am really, really excited about it. And so John's got hard work in front of him because the topography there is a little bit of a challenge, but he's a smart guy, and so I think he's going to bring back some good choices for us. The KSP and the Guadalupe Park equipment the materials have been ordered, so we hope to have those installed before the end of this year. All right, Schreiner University Center for Talent and Workforce Development and the Eddington Sports Complex renovations. They hired someone, I believe, last week, Mr. Ben Wynn, on September 9th, and so he's just getting himself familiarized with the program, what they plan to do, and kind of hitting the ground running. A lot of certifications are being offered, nursing, AI and machine learning, viticulture, and many more. So they're kind of continuing to flesh out what those certification programs are going to look like and what makes the most sense for them. I've asked Lucian Costley, their finance director, to send us just a once-a-month update on where they're at. And he's been real great to work with since I've been here, but thus far with this. The groundbreaking for the gym was held on August 28th. I think, Mr. Pell, you were in attendance at that one, I believe. They have construction fences up, and they're starting to do demo work on the interior of that space. So it is pressing forward, and they're blowing and going. So additional projects, we talked about the Downtown River Trail and have been for quite a while. So the construction project's put on hold for additional easement acquisition. So we're talking to owners of those properties now, looking to get easements acquired down to G Street and see what we can do about getting all of those acquired and put in an application for TxDOT to help us with some transportation funding. Lennar. Earlier this month, their TERS board met. So if y'all remember, they have a tax increment reinvestment zone around that property in addition to the EIC grant that was given for that regional infrastructure. So their board met at the beginning of this month, and so they are finalizing all of their last pieces to acquire. So as a large corporate entity, they take their time, make sure all their ducks in a row. As an example, I remember last year, maybe 2 years ago, I was talking to them and they said, well, we got to ask for funding to buy paper clips these days because it was so tight. So it's going through its motions, going through its process. It certainly is taking a while to get it all done, but we are excited and it's making more motion now. We are in that process.
On the Lennar, what does the TERS board make up on that?
So the TERS board is made up of the owners and their agents for 5 of the members. And so that is folks from Lennar, their engineering firm, and then there's 2 There's 2 slots that are held by both the state representative for the area and the state senator from the area, although in, I think 90%, 99% of the time, they don't send somebody or don't come themselves. And so really it's a 5-member board made up of the owners. And then once the TERS grows and there's new ownership, then that will amend, but it will always be amongst the owners of the board itself. And then if any of the other taxing entities decide they would want to participate, then I think they would be allowed representation, and the board would add members.
This is kind of an aside, sorry, just a quick answer. What % of completion are they on their Ridgeland project?
They're 50%. If I was gonna, it's a guess, but it's 50%-ish of that 130 homes.
You just audit their closing documents, or I'm getting off track a little bit. I'm just curious if you know what the occupancy is based on compared to the number of complete builds.
I can bring all that back to you based
You
on
don't
what
have,
we have.
I just
Oh, I'm
was
happy
just
to.
curious.
Yeah. We have audited that project. We continue to do. Finance does it every month, essentially, to ensure they're in compliance. And if they're not, then we send them notifications, and they have a cure period to get in compliance. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting process going through the first iteration. I think it's going to make the second one a little easier.
Just be curious how fast the expectation is of the project, once it starts and to its completion.
Absolutely, we can bring something back on that. Habitat for Humanity civil plans have been finalized, and they have a groundbreaking next month on the 2nd at 4 p.m. So I imagine Mary probably sent everybody out some stuff on that. Okay, if you hadn't, we'll make sure we get that over to you. James Avery, if you remember that project you all helped fund, was for the light intersection at 27 in James Avery's driveway. So they have that submitted to FAA. Their light is 22 feet high, and so the FAA gets to weigh in on that. And then we're awaiting that and the donation agreement from TxDOT, which basically says that once James Avery completes the project, they will give it to TxDOT, and TxDOT will accept it. And the downtown streetscapes, my last one, is city portion is done, and then the Kello Foundation has said that they were going to donate some of the plantings from their area over here by the restaurant, and so still waiting on getting that piece done. And that one should have some funding coming back to you all. I'm not sure exactly how much just yet.
Are they still gonna do the lights on Clay Street above the
Oh,
street?
yeah.
No.
We
Been so long
contributed to
since
that.
I've talked about that one.
Yeah.
Let me
That was
get
in
back
the
to you.
Yeah,
original
that's a good
scope.
question, yeah, because that was wasn't that a separate contribution to the project, or was that just part of the big package?
It was a whole part of the big package. You're testing my memory. I'll look at an email and I'll bring it back up, because I do have an answer for that. I just can't think of it right off.
And I had a question about the river trail. It seemed like I thought we had decided that we would cancel that because it was the 3 years was up at the end of this year. Cancel our contribution to that. I can't remember what that was all about.
You did. So the River Trail portion that EIC funded is only from the library to the pavilion. And we have not been able to secure all of the easements.
Right.
So we have to have all of those in order to go.
Right.
And so the consensus among the board and the city council was to cancel the project, pause the project, and then work on getting easement acquisition all the way to G Street. And then our hope is that we can go back to those folks who are reluctant about granting an easement and bring that back up and make that application to TxDOT to fund the entire piece at an 80-20 match. And
Okay.
so then this very expensive portion of the river trail would be significantly cheaper, almost probably about the amount that you have left over for this portion of the project. So
So that's the 241 coming back into the budget?
yeah, so so finance certain portions of the year, they'll take in 350, 375, depending on how much they want to do. And then whatever they've already spent, well, that's already been spent. So whatever's left over for that portion would come back out, and that's the 241 that you see there.
So basically, we've let go of that $500,000 or whatever's left.
I believe it's
spending that on the river
700 and
trail.
780, is that right?
Ms. Hammond, it was 886 total that came back to you.
886, that's right.
So prior to this funding agreement, we had a $50,000 funding agreement many years ago for the conceptual, the feasibility study on it. So it was $1,070,000 total, and then you only spent $183,000 total on everything since 4 years ago up to today. So we gave back all of that.
Okay, yeah, so that kind of goes back into our EIC monies.
Yes, your operating fund, that's how it was paid out of.
Okay. Yeah, I was kind of confused that we're still talking about it when it seemed like we had let go, but the other portion of it is still approved by the EIC from the pavilion to G Street?
No, ma'am.
No.
No, so think of it as, so you got G Street to the library, right? And broken up into 2 phases.
Okay.
Partly because of the cost, right? So the first phase initially was 800,000, and that was the library to the pavilion. And then once it came back up, 3-4 years later, it had jumped to $1 million. And that's where we were. We had hoped that we would get done by the end of this year, but the easement acquisition made that impossible, right? And so then it became, okay, well, what do we want to do? We had already talked to TxDOT about them saying, this is a great project for our transportation alternatives grant, but you have to have all of the easements from G Street all the way to this. And so the thinking of it was the staff would continue to work on the easement acquisition and not construction of any pieces of it, and then bring it all back as a grant application to TxDOT, and then bring it back to EIC for a new funding agreement if
That
we
works.
also chose.
And that's the one that we're gonna put in January 2025? That's,
Try to get it done, December and January. Yes, ma'am.
thanks.
On that one stretch that we were trying to do, we're still pending 3 easements. Is that the right number?
One easement.
Oh,
Just one?
you mean from the library to?
One that has a no,
The others are signed now?
committed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Of the 3, we've got 2 committed and
I have
one
one
no.
that's a no. Has been a no.
And then from the pavilion to G Street, what does that look like in terms of easements that you have?
Well, so we have a local citizen who has been an advocate for the project for quite a while and has a bunch of committed yeses to that. There's a few that we're gonna have to go after in a little more traditional way, but it looks good. It does look good, so we're hopeful.
Okay.
Is it 100%? Not yet.
Okay. That clear in my mind. Let's go.
I'm happy to talk to you all offline about any of it as well, and pull up the maps for the trail master plans or any of the rest of that.
Who's the traditional method person for the acquisition? Is it you?
No, God, no. You saw how that worked when I had to do it, right? It was horrible.
Where did we leave that?
So we have some sidewalks, so we can't use the dollars that you all have for this project right here because this goes beyond the scope of that, right? So this goes down towards G Street, and that's not within what you have in this agreement with the city. So we have sidewalk dollars that we have set aside. We have park dedication funds to help pay the cost of a right-of-way agent to help us with any of that. Now, I think, Mr. Howard has quite a few commitments, so hopefully we can get pretty far down that road before we have to do any of it, but we still have to pay for survey. We still have to pay for, meets and bounds and all the rest of that, which has a cost associated for each one. So, it's not $887,000, but it is, $20,000, $30,000. And I don't want to bring it back to you all for 60-day notices and the public hearings and all the rest of it. So we're, from a city side, we'll look at those alternate funding sources to help work through that piece.
Other questions? Do we have any citizen speakers signed up?
We have one. Katie Capel.
Yes, ma'am, come on up.
This is the subject I'm here for. I'm a master naturalist. My name's Katie Capel. I live at 913 Redbud in Kerrville for the last 8 years. So I've seen 2 pretty big floods during that period of time. And as my master naturalist projects, I'm involved in Bird City Kerrville and also for the Texas Outdoor Women's Network. So I'm dealing with about 700 people who are interested in doing things in the outdoors. And the river trail is a big draw, and they're very interested in the river trail. I am disappointed that we're talking about the city trail, which is, I think, something you guys are looking at from an economic point of view, but from the river point of view, I have some real serious concerns about it. This latest piece, a lot of it is the cliff side of the river, and when the floods come, they scour out the curve, and then they deposit the stuff on the other side. And I think that we saw this happening with the Veterans Pathway when the flood came. They did a good job building that thing. It has really deep footings, but when the flood came out, the mud came down. And in order to build this concrete pathway along that, pretty much a cliff, they're gonna have to dig out all the plants that are holding the cliff together now. And if it was my business on the top of the cliff, I would not want that going on underneath me. So from the river's point of view, I think it's kind of chancy. I know I've talked to this city engineer, the county engineer about building some things in the floodplain, and it's like, you know, the floodplain, you just don't know what's going to happen there. So I'm concerned. I would much prefer to be working on the trail going out to 98. And it would be a great asset to the river center as well. If the trail could go around, we could get cyclists and hikers out there. They could stop and have a drink along the way at all the restaurants that are already there. So that is my deal. And I'm afraid that if you build this trail too, where from the overhang into G Street, in order to build it, you're going to have to cut down all the trees. And it's not going to be near as much fun to be walking out there when it's a sidewalk on the side of a cliff with no plants around. So I had hoped that perhaps the input that we're getting for the 2050 plan would give you all some more information about what people would like to see happen. I mean, I know from the people that I spend time with, they would love to be able to walk from the river trail up to the soccer fields along Town Creek. And there's a couple of guys on their wheelchairs that are so happy they've got that extra 2 miles of trail that goes to the hospital. So now they can go downtown in their power chairs if they want to. So I think it would be an economic advantage to go west if we could get the easements there. But like I said, from the flood point of view and the usage point of view, I'm really not that convinced that we need to go from the overhang there to G Street. There's already a path that goes to G Street.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, those were good comments. And as you just heard, these projects are kind of pending right now, so that's good input for consideration and for you to know that it's not a go at this point in time, and definitely something we can take up.
So I could speak to, John Hewitt's concern and the staff's concern about the trees that are down there. So the design of all that is proposed to minimize any of the impacts that we have down in that trail segment. And also, there's pieces of this that are there to stabilize, like part of the engineering of that is to help stabilize in areas throughout. But I will certainly pass on that.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Trina, we have you for item 5C for our financial report.
Good afternoon, members of the board. All right, so August financials for all that Mr. Hornis was telling you about. Statement of activities. You have total revenues for the month at $540,829. The August sales tax came in at $405,647. That was down 9.8% compared to August of 2023. We looked at the report. Manufacturing was down 14%, wholesale trade down 33%, retail trade was down 7%. Those are the big box stores. But we had about 23,000 of prior and future period payments mixed in there also. So it's just been up and down, kind of hard to predict. This puts year-to-date at $4,553,000. We are missing historical budget by approximately $211,000. We do have one small accrual entry in October to do, but even so, we believe we'll still miss the sales tax budget this year by approximately $200,000, and that's about 4% from where we budgeted at. We did receive September sales tax last week, and it was $451,000. That is an increase over last year by 11%, so up and down. I'm not sure if there's future period payments in that or not, but we'll get that report here probably this week, late this week. Moving down to your interest income, $135,000 for the month. That puts you year-to-date at $1,204,000. The feds are meeting tomorrow and Wednesday, so they'll make a decision whether they're going to start dropping the interest rates. They're looking anywhere from 25 to 50 basis points this first go round. But we'll have more on that as soon as we know. Next section down is your expenditures. City of Kerrville admin fee for $17,000, and then your monthly debt service transfer of $90,000. And with the projects moving pretty quick here, $22,000 your downtown streetscape project, $18,500 for golf course improvements, $40,700 Olympic pool, $24,000 in the Callow Theater roof and HVAC project. We did get the payment out to Habitat for Humanity Mariposa subdivision, $107,000, and then we put the down payments for both playgrounds for the KSP and Guadalupe Parks, $375,000 for those. Total expenditures for the month, $694,618, and net change in position is a negative $153,000 for the month. Any questions on those activities, Mr. Gibson? Okay, cash flow, just pretty much the same. First column there is your fiscal year 24 activity to date through August. Ending cash balance is $23.9 million, and then the rest of this fiscal year and the 25 projections by the quarter. And then your financial analysis. This page is getting full. You have your project commitments on the top left chart. That airport box hangar project, we did remit the last payment on that contract this month in September, so that will be closing out. City Council approved that cancellation of the downtown River Trail contract, so we'll close that out. Your bottom chart there is your cash and investment balances. Texpool was earning 5.44% by the end of August, and then your other short-term investments average out to be about 5.25%. We have not quite yet purchased another investment. I know we talked about that last month. We just kind of wanted to look at cash flow, monitor what the feds are doing, look at all your project expenditures, see how everything's going to play out, and we're waiting on some information from our investment advisors today, and I'm sure he's tied up because the market's fixing to change. But since we get some information, we're probably looking at purchasing something. Honestly, we're not comfortable investing more than about $2.5 million. Just looking at a multitude of things, your debt service coverage ratio. When they do bonds testing, you have to have 1.5 times your annual debt service held in cash. So I wouldn't be comfortable more than going less than $4 million in your cash account, at all times. So just, we have to fill it all out. We'll see what they have to offer and see if we can buy into something. But we know rates are going to change, so we just want to get in. But our first priority is safety. All right, and then your chart to the right is your sales tax comparisons. The 12-month rolling average right now is down a little behind, 0.5% down, but once we get everything booked, we'll see where we land. And that's all I have on that. And this last chart here is the 5-year cash flow that Ms. Hammond requested. We wanted to see what it would look like if we had the proposed fiscal year 25 sales tax budget plugged in flat for the next 5 years, and with everything, projects, all that going on. So as you can see, your third column is your fiscal year 25 projection. We're looking at $6.5 million cash balance. So that's where I say we would be okay going in another $2.5 million in investments. But you're going to be pretty heavy in fiscal year 25 with your operating funds going out the door as well as the revenue bond funds going out the door. So we just want to tread slowly, I guess.
I have a question on that. So the Heart of the Hills was approved for 2 million and you only show 1 million coming out? Is something different about that?
So for fiscal year 25, that's all we expect to spend out of that 2 million. But then going into 26, oh, you have the 1.25. I owe you another 200,000. Yes.
Well,
I think it was
another
2
million on Heart of the Hills, right?
Yeah, Heart of the Hills is showing 1, Trina, so we need
Oh,
to
I'm sorry.
add
Yes,
a
ma'am.
million
You're
to
correct.
that.
I'll
And
plug
then-
you in
Yeah,
another
and then the
million.
Granger is showing 2, and I think it was 2.2.
Yes,
So it would need
you're correct.
Another 200 and,
200,000, maybe.
We'll get that updated. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, just the million, the 200,000 probably is not gonna make a lot, but the million will make a difference on
A
that
big
cash
difference.
flow and,
If you see the net
Number.
investments on that second to bottom line before the ending cash balance, so that's kind of somewhat of a plug, not really, but you'll have cash out the door right now, but you'll have some maturities coming in, so it'll increase your balance some for what, right now you have 5 million invested, and then we'll, if we buy more, it'll reduce temporarily and then come back to you.
okay.
we'll get an updated spreadsheet here and send that out to y'all afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I
Sure.
think it looks like everything will be still pretty good. The only one is the end of the fiscal year 2026 has the lowest amount, but that doesn't, I mean, we would still have that 1.5 that's in reserve, so you would still have a 4 million cash balance, but I didn't know how that million would affect that. Another million,
Quite a
so-
bit.
You'd end up with 2 point, so instead of 2.47, it's 1.27
Yeah,
plus that 1.5, so you're at 2.7 million.
2.7 plus the 1.5.
But then you have some maturities come in, so you'll have some of your cash back also. You have kind of a lot out there right now. Any further questions? Cash flow? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, item 6A, and I want to start by thanking Kyle and Greg for meeting with me months ago now, and especially to Michael Hornus for all the work he's done, and just in this, it was just last week, that all the things we had talked about, he and I kind of started a red line, and he did the red line for us based on the notes that we had together. So I really appreciate that.
Y'all have
And
printed copies of the red lines on the very back.
yeah,
of your
the
packet.
first one that went out in our packet, I don't know if it looked different to you guys, but I didn't see any of the red lines, so I got with Michael on that, and he had done it, but he didn't send the version out where you could see
Got to
the
click
red
on
lines.
5 or 6 things, and
Yeah.
it took me a year to figure it out. So
Yeah,
hopefully you
no,
got the
it's all
PDF.
good. I mean, it was so, in that second email you got, it was the draft, it has notes on the right side, and then it has red lines.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of a combination of logistical items, but then there's kind of some a couple of paragraphs that really deal with process, as well. And so after looking at the red lines, some of the items that we talked about, I know Celeste has notes. Does anyone else have notes on that, draft, the red line? Okay, so I know if you'll bear with me, I just wanted to go over some of my notes, just because in talking to one of the applicants, there was some confusion over the process, which is normal because many of the people applying and entities applying for funding requests are not used to the way that not only the city does business, but the way that economic improvement is calculated, and how our process, but also how, government process and economic development process kind of flows. If you look at the back of your packet and for the City of Kerrville Economic Corporation, this is what's on our website currently, not the red line, but the version without the red line. You'll see that there's kind of an introduction and guideline, and then you'll see behind that is the application. And for our purposes, I personally did not look at the actual application. I will defer to the city unless one of you has comments on that. I defer to the city for what they need in order to process the application. Really, this is more about the applicant when they start looking at the packet, and what do they see and how do they interpret that. If you start and look at, if you're just looking from the top, you've got the title, you've got the Economic Improvement Corporation basic information, you have City of Kerrville Economic Improvement Corporation, you have the types of projects that are eligible. Following that, still on the first page, you'll see guidelines and procedures. At that point, Michael made a lot of red line suggestions, and we talked a little bit about one thing in particular. If you look underneath guidelines and procedures, and I know Celeste, you've got notes on this too, business development and participation in public infrastructure projects, and then quality of life projects are broken out separately, which kind of makes sense, but there's also a little overlap in the process. So basically, what I did was look in I didn't really change much of anything. I just kind of moved categories around, and I gave you a copy of what I have to be moved under for consideration under guidelines and procedures. You will find eligible projects, you will find applicants, and you will find information about the application just kind of interspersed throughout all of this. So I pulled those items out and kind of treated them separately as almost definitions, but not changing any of the content, really just trying to clean up the way that it was itemized, the flow, right? And then Go Team, and that's the first, I wouldn't say substantive change, but the Go Team will consist of the city manager or designee, the executive. We found the executive director of KEDC, an appointed EIC board member, and a KEDC board member. That's a change. But what we found was that there were people that were commonly being called to attend the meetings and being considered part of the Go Team that really weren't spoken to in this application. And through this process, it was determined that the city manager or his designee, in this case Michael, is almost always leading this process. If we have some core members, then Michael can call up the members that may be appropriate, specific to project needs, rather than having, say, a sitting place for
An engineer or something.
right, engineer or, commissioner, if it's not a, Kerr County project, if it's a Kerrville project, or, those kinds of things. But they were being called to the meetings when not necessarily even being spoken to on this. So that's a clarification. So what I would like to do before we go, Celeste, into your notes is just make sure that you guys understand what I'm suggesting and proposing under guidelines and procedures. I also combined the business development and participation in public infrastructure with the quality of life because there was so much overlap. What it seemed to me that under the quality of life projects, we're most likely going to get quality of life projects coming to us directly from the city of Kerrville, which makes them different. Although the city of Kerrville can apply for any type of project, it seemed to me in the application, as it was written, that they were trying to specify the differences. And to me, the big difference is that the city of Kerrville does not go through the same process as any other applicant. The city of Kerrville has to get approval by the city council before coming and making any kind of ask to EIC. And we would kind of serve as more or less the go team for the city projects, right? We'd be expecting them to give us specifically the answers to the kinds of questions that we would ask as far as the eligibility of the project, needs, return on investment, any of the things that are applicable to the project, without going through that go team process. Makes sense. That's what I tried to do, is basically thought, if I'm looking at these project types, that's really the difference to me. Some things will apply to a business development project that won't apply to a quality of life project, perhaps, a direct return on investment. But I think that's something that we know that it's going to apply to as applicable to each and every project. To me, that was the big thing. That was the big difference, and that was what I pulled out from that. So I don't think we're really at a point to vote on this. But I would like your consideration for the next meeting, and I would like to also get Celeste's notes. And then the final thing we need to do is really process-oriented. Today, I'll direct you to that after we talk about Celeste's notes, but it's on the second page. And this really is a clarification that I think the applicants need after we get through the GO team. What is the GO team really doing? And how is that process moving forward, so that there's not any, or there is little confusion as possible, that it's spelled out as easily as possible. Did you want to?
No, I can wait.
Okay, we'll go to Celeste notes, and then I'll turn it over to you, Michael.
Okay, I mean, these are just little things that I picked up when I was reading through. I mean, I understand what you're saying. They seem very similar. To me, it felt like the quality of life has a whole different focus on their projects than the business development projects. And so for me, it feels like they need to stay separate, but I can go either way on that. And then Michael had asked the question about whether or not the funding agreement needed to be done before the public hearing.
Yeah, I could speak to that.
Yeah, so that, if do you have other, besides that
Okay.
topic, do you have other, because
Okay.
that's what we're gonna get to, and I'll get to your notes on that.
Okay, and then where it says that EIC may direct a public hearing, for some reason, I thought that was a mandatory, because it feels like it has been since I've just been on the board, that if you're requesting something, is a mandatory public hearing, but not always. It just seems like we've had it for everything that we've done this year.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
It's a May thing. You guys,
Okay.
if you decide you didn't want to hold a public hearing and go through the process.
Okay, and then I wonder if under both of the two different kinds, you list on number 3, the city master plan documents. Are you trying not to refer to the 2050 plan? Because it seems like everything we try to look at how the 2050 plan comes into what it is that we're looking at.
That's we could change it to say 2050, but if you just say comprehensive plan, if the name changes, then it's still, so it's reflective in there. It just says comprehensive
Okay.
plan.
Yeah, and on on mine, because Michael and I even talked about that, where like there's so many city plans, and in the original document only talked about 2 or 3, but the city is always doing master planning, and they do a great job of it. Over on my page, I just changed it to city master planning documents, so that it could be related to parks, it could be related to comp plan, it could be related to, long range, whatever long range plans may be adopted by the city at that point.
I just wondered if we want to, that you could keep that and you have the Parks Master Plan. I wonder if we could go ahead and refer to the 2050 plan next, and then other city master plans, just because, well, I will just say for me as a citizen, I have got to play on those 2050 committees and things like that. I have been really impressed and inspired by, it seems like with anything that the city does, that they're always referring back to the 2050 plan.
We can add,
I just like to see it here for our applicants to know that that's important to the city.
we can add it where it
Saying
says
that the
comprehensive plan.
comprehensive plan that's shown here is the 2050 plan
It is.
presently?
It is. So if it changes names, if next year it's you know, council decides they want to do an update to it and they call it the 2060 plan, then it is referenced generically as the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, I thought it was. Anyway, I mean, I'm just making that statement.
I mean, and potentially, if this document survives long enough, we'll have a 2080 plan or a
You will.
100 plan or something to
You will.
be the comprehensive plan.
Just, you know, that was my comment on that. And then, and then, oh, that, we were gonna talk about that. And then, I don't know if you had just noticed under number 3, under the quality of life improvement projects, and number 3, there's something in there about direct or indirect economic benefit, and it's not really clear what you're saying, consistency with, because this is where you're talking about plans, and then you have this direct or indirect economic benefit.
So quality of life projects, so when you're doing primary job projects, right, you have to measure it against how much money they're investing, how many jobs they're gonna create. When you're dealing with quality of life projects, you all have a significant amount of latitude in terms of how you can measure that. And so you don't wanna have too clear of a picture in terms of they will need, this quality of life project will have to, you know, raise X dollars or
Right.
create jobs, because they don't do that, right?
Right.
So that's the sort of intangible of quality of life projects, is that it's measured however you and the city council kind of see fit, you know? So how do we put in a measurement for the river trail, I guess is a good example, right?
Yeah.
So,
I'm just saying, it's just written kind of strangely in that sentence, like, it could include the direct or indirect economic benefits or something, but,
yes, ma'am, we can amend that.
yeah.
Yeah,
just
and
something.
on my draft, you'll see at the bottom where it says Go Team, and remember, I had combined them, and this is not what we, certainly don't have to approve the combining of them, but I put Go Team will evaluate recommended applications based on, and those were all consistent with the project types, that for all 3 projects, and then if you flip the page over, I would just put economic analysis, return on investment, job creation, impact on tax base as applicable. We could add other things, and that's what I understand that's what separates the projects, really, is that number 5, that they're all gonna kind of fall under different categories and be considered differently based on the project type. It just seemed like we were kind of repeating a whole bunch of stuff and trying to separate out this number 5 item, because it is different per project, and also it seemed like they're trying to stick the city projects underneath quality of life, which may or may not be what the city is applying for. So that's what I was trying to speak to there. This is just guidelines, so it doesn't have to be like, it just needs to be as applicable to,
It just needs to be
each
clear
project.
clear to the applicant. And then the one other thing, specific criteria for the economic impact analysis is your last line, may be described in a separate economic development incentive policy. And so that seems, if I were the applicant, I'd be going, well, is it or is it not? You know, is there a place where there is a separate incentive policy? Or, you know, or how do they find out if there's one? It just seems strange to have it maybe in there. It leaves it up to the applicant to go, well, I don't know, is it or is it not? So, and then the application, to me, didn't seem to fit a quality of life project very well. And I don't know if we want to have kind of go off your application and have that, have a separate segment for quality of life projects, or, you know, it seems more connected to the what did you call the first ones? The business development and the public infrastructure well, really the business development. It seems like it's really geared towards the business development applicant. And then some of for the public.
That is the purview of the board, if y'all want to have 2 separate applications.
Or maybe we can add an area that was more geared towards quality of life. Anyway, those were just the things that showed up to me as I was reading through it.
Good thoughts, and I haven't really looked at the project application. Like I said, I was really looking at the guidelines, so I was not aware of that, so that's a good consideration. So I would suggest if you go back to Michael's draft and you go through what you see on the first page and the second page, that what he and I did was really try to clarify some items until you get to, and we kind of left these two paragraphs alone because the heart of the process is really contained in those two little bitty paragraphs before quality of life. And I wanted to just briefly read you some comments. I asked for comments over, it had been expressed to me by two applicants that they had some confusion, so I wanted to kind of dig in and see how much of that had to do with circumstances, maybe with changeover in city staff, inability for the team to meet as quickly as hopefully, like the Go team to meet as quickly as possible, things like that that can't really be mitigated. But here are some things that I really think we need to decide about Go team, for example. Okay, so should the applicant be invited to attend Go meetings? And is that something, how is that addressed right now as far as we invite the applicant to come to EIC, but when the project goes to Go team, how is that, what does that look like?
They aren't included in that. It gives the Go team kind of an opportunity to have a frank discussion amongst themselves
Sure.
prior to, right?
Well, I would assume that coming out of Go team, there will likely be some questions. It may or may not be easy to immediately respond to and recommend a project. Same as with us, right? Something comes before us and we may have questions that we can't respond to in a single meeting. We need answers that are going to come back to us. And that may not always happen in Go team meetings, but I would imagine that it could happen on a at least fairly regular basis. What are you finding?
So, typically it'll start with an application that comes to staff, right? We'll do a cursory review of it and make sure that, it meets the intent of the law, that, it makes sense just in general, right? And we'll direct the Go team to meet. Staff will have a recommendation at the Go team meeting, right? Here's what we see, here's what you've done historically.
In Go team, will they have financial information when they meet?
They will, I mean, I think if somebody's bringing like a $20 million ask and you have $2 million available, we just say there's not enough funding. I mean, we almost stop it at that point, right? Because doesn't make any sense. But yes, they would, right? And usually the discussion spreads around, is it affordable in one lump sum? Is it affordable in multiple payments, right? What's the best avenue for this? What's the best thing for EIC as far as, your financial balance, right? So then that becomes a question of like, what is the purview of the board, right? Obviously, some things have been brought before the board and it's like, well, no, we'll take this. We're good with doing this, 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 and this, right? So it is partially a guess on the part of the Go team on what the board's purview is, right? So it'll just be, okay, here's a full ask for $3 million. Do it at once or do it spread out over this many years. What is that? What does that look like? And we try, the reason we want members of KEDC board, EIC board, and not staff doing this is because we really hate when it becomes a staff-directed project, right? That's something we get hit on all the time as well. This is a staff thing, staff.
Staff's holding us up, or staff's doing this, or
Yeah,
staff's-
right.
yeah.
A lot of times there are legitimate questions like, well, you need to break this up into multiple applications. Well, I don't want to do that. Okay, well, I don't know what to tell you. You got to
Yeah,
break it
and
up,
I was gonna
right?
go, yeah, so here's the thing I was gonna go into next. It's perfect lead into this. So we had a project that went to Go team. Go team first needed clarification. So if you're an applicant, you're thinking that the process goes Go team, it goes Go team, goes EIC, and you're thinking linearly, right? Like I go to Go team, so that means the next month it's gonna go to EIC. Okay, so what happens when Go team either has more, and this is not spelled out in the application, I think it should be, if the Go team, and it has happened, one meeting of the Go team said, hey, this is a huge packet, and we have not had nearly enough time to even dig into this to even have an idea of what to do. So the decision was made to have a second Go Team meeting. Now, Go Team meets whenever they can. It's not like a set meeting time, right? So they had to kind of digest the information, and then they had to come back for a second meeting. At the second meeting, they decided to recommend that the project be broken into 2 projects. Now, here was the question from the applicant. Am I supposed to respond back to Go Team, or am I supposed to take my application forward as is, or am I supposed to change my application and then send it forward to EIC? And that's a big question that I don't really know what the answer is to that. And that was the question. There was like, am I really presenting to Go Team or EIC? And I had that with both applicants because both applicants presented something that Go Team didn't recommend in the way that it was presented in some form or fashion. So what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to respond to Go Team? You know, it's like, is Go Team really recommending to the applicant? Are they recommending to EIC? Or what does that look like? And it was very confusing to both applicants in that situation. So what should that look like? What should anyone that's applying think is going to happen in this situation? Knowing that there's variables, right? But if you're sending an application forward to Go Team and you're not presenting that application, Go Team makes a recommendation, in this case, separate this into 2 projects. Are you submitting again to Go Team? Are you saying, no, I want to do it as is, I'm taking it to EIC that way, or what does that look like? And I'm just asking, I don't have the answer. I think that the applicant needs to kind of have an understanding of, if Go Team doesn't recommend your project as you presented it, or they don't recommend it at all, then what happens?
Do they have recourse to the Go Team decision?
And remember, Go Team was set up also to be a bit of a protection to this body, meaning that if a project doesn't fit the application standards, this body isn't listening to all the projects if they haven't been vetted and they aren't going to, be able to go forward, or doesn't make sense to go forward. We've got kind of a first preliminary look at all of that before it comes to us.
Yeah, it seems like you could put that under what happens with the Go Team.
But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if anybody really knows what happens with the Go Team. And that's where the confusion is.
I mean, I'm just kind of shooting from the hip on this, but I think Go Team should first look at eligibility. And if something is not eligible, then it needs to stop right there.
Right?
I think a second criteria needs to be, does EIC reasonably have the money to support the project?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if those 2 conditions are met, then I think it shouldn't necessarily be killed. And maybe if there's some other reason why it might be, that probably doesn't need to be on the shoulders of the Go Team committee members. Unless perhaps they're in complete agreement, including the EIC representative. So, for instance, if the non-EIC board members on the Go Team, for whatever reason, just don't like it, even though it qualifies, then I think if the EIC representative feels as though it merits bringing to the whole board, it probably should. And give some discretion, some ultimate discretion perhaps to the EIC representative, since they're actually a board member of the EIC.
So if EIC says, hey, I'm looking at this project, and I say EIC, and Go Team. They're looking at a project and they say, hey, this is a really big project, but really there's 2 projects in here, right? There's 2 projects. So should we tell the applicant to resubmit with it being 2 projects? We like the projects. We just don't think that the way the application was submitted, we would like to see it, because we're thinking it fits 2 models better. So that at that point, let's say they like the project, it meets the criteria, but they think that the project maybe falls under 2 categories or 2 timelines or 2 different things. that they say, hey, would you submit that back to us as two projects? Would you say, the go to, or would you have direct Michael to say the go team is recommending when you take this before EIC that you consider making it into two project applications? I'm using a specific example because that's something specifically that happened. And so then there was a breakdown. There was like, well, what do we do? Am I supposed to, I'm going to break this up. Am I supposed to, what do I do now? Am I supposed to give this to EIC? Am I really coming before EIC? I've never really had a chance to talk or present my case to, I keep saying EIC, to Go Team. And then it has to go back through Go Team for them to approve it? Or are they just suggesting that to me? Are they giving me suggestions, but they're pushing it forward to EIC? And they're saying maybe your project will be more successful if you do it this way because, X, Y, or Z. So that was that's part of the issue right there. It's like, Go Team may say, then Go Team's supposed to make suggestions. They're supposed to vet it. They're supposed to think it through. And I thought that the suggestions that the Go Team made and came out with were good, but it broke the process down by
It's like,
quite.
what does the applicant do with
So-
those suggestions? So we would have to make that decision.
And ultimately,
to say-
ultimately, they were asked to take it back to Go Team, I believe, is what happened. And it had to go to Go Team twice, or it was supposed to, or it did, or it didn't. I'm not real sure how it ended up. It was confusing.
It was murky at best.
Very confusing. Yeah, and it's, not to your detriment. It's just not spelled out as far
So we
as,
can kind of.
that's what we need to do.
Mhm.
And maybe that's something we think about if we're not ready to, to direct Mike at this, Mike Hayes at this time, is think about what that process should look like to the applicant. And come back next month with suggestions.
Well, so to the second point, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just since I'm new to this, and Greg, I want to look at you while I talk about this because I'm kind of thinking about loan committees when I'm doing this. They apply. It goes to Go Team. Is that correct? That's the process.
Kind of. It goes a little bit of vetting to city before it goes to Go Team, but yeah.
I think Go Team should take a look at it. Then they should set up a meeting with the applicant so they can talk through it before it goes anywhere else. That way Go Team can say, yay or nay, this fits quality of life, or fits an economic development project for the city. Once they meet with that, then Go Team can meet by themselves and say yay or nay and present it to EIC to present it to council. Kind of like a loan committee, because we don't give people money without talking to them.
Jeff, I think my thought is, I don't want an eligible project necessarily to be killed at Go Team level without having an opportunity to be considered here because, other than your EIC representative on the Go Team, none of the rest of those Go Team members are EIC board members. And yes, they don't have a power to approve something, but they also, I think, shouldn't have the power to deny something either, assuming it's eligible and we've got money available.
Right. Well, I don't think it should be killed if it's eligible, but, definitely a vetting process through
Yeah.
the Go Team to say yay or nay, or, maybe restructure Go Team and
sure.
put 2 EIC members on.
Now, to be clear, if you think about it, city's doing that basic level, right? Mike's looking at it the second it comes in or right thereafter. By the time it goes to Go Team, Mike, you've already kind of weighed in legally with whether it applies. Is that correct or not correct? Or does it change?
I don't know where I am in the process, but at some point before
We're in it
it's your
somewhere.
agenda, I'll look at it and I'll weigh in on that, yeah.
So, yeah, we need to, it's in the process that way, right? That it meets the legal requirement, that there is funding available, right? It already says all that. That it meets with the consistency of the comprehensive plans for the city of Kerrville. For the business development applications, they have to have shown there's an economic impact, right? And whether or not it's already under construction. I certainly don't want to have meeting upon meeting just to do it. I get what you're saying, but I don't know that I want to put you know. Because really, they're quality of life projects. That's what they are. They're just quality of life projects that are coming from the outside world, that are nonprofits and NGOs. Private businesses, they're going to come in and say, I want to do X, and I'm going to add 15 employees out of the deal. It gets complicated a little bit when you get to the NGOs, the Habitats, the Shriners, you know, where it's kind of quasi, you know, is this a business enterprise application or is this a quality of life application, right? It's kind of, it's a gray area. So from the process standpoint, to me, if the Go team makes a recommendation for, you know, we don't think it's a good project or it shouldn't be funded at the request that they have, from a staff standpoint, that gets forwarded on. Then they come state their case, right? We do try to buffer that from y'all, because I think that was the sentiment. Previous administrations buffer that for us. And so we do that, right? If that's not the sentiment, then I got no problems passing it forward, right? Because some projects are good, some projects are not good. That's just the truth of it.
Well, then maybe we should just get the recommendation from the Go team, since it comes to us anyway, regardless, and let EIC and council say yay or nay.
That's
I mean, it's gonna come, so
that's what it is.
that just takes the whole thing
That's kind of
out.
the way we've done it.
And then it's done, it's over with, and
Yeah.
easy breezy. So, and if it's a discussion about, well, I don't know which one I'm applying for, I don't know what this is for, have two applications, one for quality of life and one for economic development.
We try to get everybody to come meet with us before they drop an application.
So,
Doesn't always happen.
you know, I mean, if they meet with you, then you can point them in the right direction, and then they can go to Go Team, go to EIC with their recommendation either way, and be done with it.
So in the two cases where there was some confusion that were specifically brought to me, the first one is Go Team recommended that, hey, we like this project, we want it to go forward, but we really think it should be separated into two projects. That applicant did that, but then was confused as to whether that needed to go back to Go Team or if that went straight to EIC. That was one thing.
Yeah.
Another project was applicant submitted a request and it was recommended that the full amount not be asked for. That applicant then went ahead and went forward with the full ask to EIC, even though that recommendation was different coming out. Those things kind of diverged in how they were handled by the applicant as far as what the applicant did with the project and with the ask.
So maybe you can specify in here that the Go team makes recommendations, but is not the final, does not make the final say. You can listen to their recommendations and then proceed forward to make your presentation to the EIC as you see fit.
It could
Right.
be as easy as saying, Go Team's gonna potentially make recommendations to your project. Those recommendations will be sent to the applicant and they will be sent to EIC for consideration. But once that goes through Go Team, thumbs up if it meets legal requirements, thumbs up. But anything that they want to suggest, rather than having the applicant coming back to Go Team, the applicant knows these are the questions that were brought up by the Go Team. You can decide if you want to address or change your application before it comes to EIC, but those were the questions, and those questions will be posed to EIC, and those recommendations will also be given to EIC.
To me, that makes it clean. That makes it a lot cleaner than to just spell it out for the applicant.
So that first paragraph, so we deviate from that and have in the past for the sake of the applicant, because it was like, this is really messy and you shouldn't turn this in this way, right? And then that created issues. And so it says in here, in that first paragraph, upon review of the application and support documents, the Go Team will make a recommendation to the EIC. We amended it to say the EIC staff liaison will then notify the applicant of the next available EIC board meeting for a project presentation. So you have it in here in this first of the two highlighted paragraphs that Go Team will review it, make a recommendation, and then you'll be on the next available board meeting for consideration. And we can process it that way. And when there's folks who come in with kind of wonky applications, we'll just be like, you should clean this up,
You
you know,
don't, then
and then here's what you should do. And if they do it, they do it. And if they don't, you know that they kind of chose to ignore the Go Team's
We know, right,
recommendations,
we
and that's
know what
part of,
was recommended, we know if they decided to act on that or not.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that process makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it's in line with what you guys are talking about. To the point of having them interview with us, with the Go Team, it really, I think, what we see is, it just allows that one time, because here with your body, you have to have the public, debate all out in the public. There's no anything else. The EIC, the Go Team has that one opportunity to sit there and go, why are we doing this, what's the consideration? What's the point? And so you can have a little bit more of that frank discussion, right? If y'all want us to have the applicants interviewed by the Go Team, we can do that. We certainly can add that to
Well,
the
I think there's
list.
value in if the Go Team has questions, it would hopefully be questions that EIC would have. And that gives the applicant a chance to address those if they choose to. But it doesn't force their hand, because there's gonna be an applicant that says, I wanted to present my application this way, but the Go Team wouldn't let me because they said I had to do this first, but this is how I wanted to present it. That happens. So maybe those recommendations are given to applicant and to EIC, so that when we get a packet back, we know what the questions and what the concerns are even. But if it is legally, if it meets those first two criteria, right, then it can be presented.
I mean, you could include something in that paragraph that the Go Team will release to the applicant their suggestions, their questions, and their recommendations that they're making to the EIC.
Oh, yeah,
And so that you can
they
just
do.
kind of like
Yeah.
expand that just a little bit so that the applicant understands that the EIC is going to hear all of their concerns or something like that. And then the EIC will make the final.
We'll add that the
We'll need to
applicant
go back
will
and
receive
forth
it.
for that too.
I think that's beneficial to both parties, right?
Mhm.
Sure.
We see the initial questions, and that helps direct us, and then the applicant can decide how to speak to those, or if they think it's important to speak to those.
And suggestions, so then we'll know what they suggested and whether or not the applicant decided to follow that too. But just to make it really clear that the Go Team will give all of that to the EIC, and that both parties the applicant will get that and the EIC will get it. And so then they can make up their mind as to whether or not they.
We'll put it in there explicitly, but they do receive whatever you guys get, they receive as well.
Right.
My bigger section is the second paragraph for me. So when you all call to have a
Right.
public
I'm sorry,
hearing,
sorry about that.
you haven't approved the first time you hear it, right? So Habitat, it's the first thing that comes to my mind. So Habitat makes their presentation to y'all. You all say that you like the project, so let's call for a public hearing, right? However, if during that public hearing, you hear a bunch of testimony and you're like, nah, I don't think we should do this, right? And now Mike has spent a good amount of his week kind of prepping up
Good job.
funding agreements for things that aren't gonna matter, or not that they're not gonna matter, that they're not gonna pass, right? And so what we've been doing recently is, so you'll hear the item, host the public hearing the next time, and then the following month, the funding agreement is when it actually comes back. So the way it states it in there is that the funding agreement will be available at the public hearing. And so it's almost to me, it seems like a foregone conclusion that it's been approved already. You're holding the public hearing to hold the public hearing, and so I wanted some clarification on that
Mhm, no, I
for
think
staff
that's good.
standpoint. It's because it does take a little time. We gotta work through all the recitals, right? Make sure that it meets all the standards, which sometimes takes a little bit of like some of these ones that have been recent have been kind of like, hey, does this meet the intent of what is supposed to happen? And so it's not like a half an hour of putting all that together,
The way we're handling it is at the public, we're kind of conditioning things at the public hearing. We're really having that discussion, we're hearing from the public, and then when we're making that decision, what we're doing is we're saying, yeah, we want it to be this way, which you guys wouldn't know until after.
you have it,
After
right.
that, right?
And so when you're doing the funding agreement, you're working with the applicant on that too? Or do you have
Usually we
discussion?
don't, usually we don't need that,
Oh.
because I mean, it is
I was
particulars,
gonna
right?
say, it gives them the idea that they're getting approved and then,
There'll be questions of, we like to submit as much as we can to Mike to say, like, if it's a business development, it's gonna have at least $25 million of investment. It's gonna employ between 40 and 60 people, and it's gonna pay these wages, and all these things are already listed out. But, again, is it the first time that you hear it and you're calling for the public hearing when it's like, okay, this is approved? And you're calling a public hearing because you have to, right? And it's already done? Or is the public hearing the time when you're actually making the determination of, yes, we agree to this, after the discourse with the public, and now we can direct the city attorney to start working on that funding agreement? Does that make sense?
yeah.
Just
it
trying to
does.
clarify that piece,
Yes. It seemed to me like we would, that after a public hearing, we sometimes have talked about the funding agreement and had questions at that time after the public hearing. But I can see that is a possibility that we just talk about what we've heard and make a decision as to whether to move forward towards a funding agreement, right? After the
It's
public
just a
hearing is
matter,
done.
it's just a matter of, do we really, or what are we really saying at that first meeting? Are we really saying at that first meeting, yeah, we're in, and that's why we're calling a public hearing? If so, then it would make sense to have the application there. But are we saying, hey, let's think about this and let's hear what the public has to say, and let's think about the questions we might have, and then have the discussion about maybe more specifically, what can we stomach, or what do we want to do with this? And after that, make a decision, which would mean that we're going to push the funding agreement to another meeting, because we're taking the steps in a different, and we're looking at the first step differently, perhaps, the way we've been handling it, in my opinion, is like, yeah, this looks good. Let's look at this again. In that month, we may come up with more questions, and then we hear the public hearing before we make a decision. Now, I would say that we've also never turned down any of our public hearings in the last 2 years. So we are kind of already saying yes in a way because of the response we get when we come to this meeting. So that's just, that's what we need to consider. What are we saying, and what's our process, and how long do we want that to take, and what's the best route for that? And the applicant needs to know that as well, because they may think it's done at public hearing, but then we've got a funding agreement, or we may have a funding agreement.
So have we voted to approve funding after a public hearing on the same day?
Have we had a funding application come back the same month ever in the last year or two? Practically speaking, we're not really doing that for the most part, at least.
Not since I've been here.
Right. So what we're actually doing is saying, looks like a good project. Let's call a public hearing. Let's hear from the public. Let's ask some more questions, because staff is usually presenting to us 2 times. And the first time we may have some questions, and on that second presentation, they're answering some of those questions, as well as hearing from the public, and we may have further questions. At which point we make that decision, and then the draft is brought before us at another meeting.
Like the Center for Talent and Workforce Development and the gym project, between the time that they spoke to y'all first and we had the public hearing, I can guarantee you we weren't done with figuring out how that was gonna look in the funding agreement.
I think the way we're actually doing it is probably better for everybody personally. But I mean, it doesn't match what's on the application, or it's not clear as far as what was on the application. Is that correct?
It says there will be a funding agreement available during the public hearing.
Right.
It's the cart before the horse.
I would love to see us be able to get through it in 2 meetings instead of 3, just from a timing standpoint. But I like each of the steps, and I'm not sure what would be the best way to shrink that down. I do think they need to be, 3 separate actions, or there needs time between approval by the board and drafting and approving the funding agreement. Like getting a look at it before we do a public hearing, so as much as I'd like to condense that down to a shorter period of time, I think that's probably the way it needs to be.
Mike, you're the one that does the work. You want to weigh in on this?
Well, I think I've been thinking through this. It's almost akin to like the way Planning and Zoning Commission looks at projects, and they're not projects, they're zoning changes. Application process that goes to Development Services. Development Services puts it on P&Z's agenda, and if it really meets the application and use the term administratively complete, and it's ready to go at that meeting. Kind of at a minimum, P&Z may not like it, may not approve it, but it certainly meets the threshold for all the information. And then they make a recommendation and it goes to council. So that may be,
And the
I don't know if
ordinance
that
is
helps
already
you,
drafted.
but I agree. I'm very sensitive to people who say, we submit applications and it takes a long time. And it's this bureaucracy. So I'm sensitive to that, but I think, so the big part of this is how tight will the application be? How much information will they submit initially? Where the go team is in that process? And then I've seen it done both ways. I guess that's
Sure.
bottom line. I've seen it come to EIC. EIC looks at the project. I think for sure, Clarkson, you've said, do they think at that point, does the applicant think that they've got a good project? Well, I think they do if you're moving it to a public hearing. Unless the wheels fall off between then and there, or someone comes from the public and says, this is the worst thing because of X, Y, and Z, I think the momentum is moving. So, I think it certainly can be done in 2 meetings. For all intents and purposes, there's no way it shouldn't be done in 3 meetings, really. But it's just a longer process, and I know that I'm sure Michael gets calls too. I get calls all the time, like, why does it take so long? And not just for EIC work, but other stuff.
Well, I mean, obviously, these are all public meetings, so the first time we see something and we discuss, there's opportunities for the public to come and comment during that time. I don't know, is it necessary, is it legally required that we hold a public hearing on it?
Yes.
Yes.
And
You have to
could
notice it
that be,
twice.
but that could be the first time we see it, not the second.
No, well,
We had to call, we
have to
we
call.
can't ever call a public hearing the first time we hear it.
Well,
if I called, we would have to do it from a staff standpoint. We would have to spend a couple $100 to put that into the paper. Knowing nothing, that's a bad idea to just have it considered as like, this is gonna be the public hearing for this project. Like, that's staff making the assumption.
And it makes
I would
us
not
look
want
bad
us to
too
do
if
that.
it's something that people are gonna criticize and say, well, y'all are holding a public hearing for it.
That would be
It-
every project
It implies
going that way.
that we made that decision to move it forward.
Well, I think having a longer process is probably better for us long-term because frankly, if you're asking for public money, you're just gonna have to wait for us to make our decisions. And the more time we have between introduction of the idea and funding, it gives us time to question, is this project viable? Is this reasonable? What kind of feedback are we getting from the public? The public, being the public, they don't frequently keep up with stuff until it hits the newspaper or hits some social media feed. And then after they know about the project, then that's when they ask questions. And that's rarely the first time out the gate, I think. So I think the longer the process, probably the better for us.
No, I don't necessarily agree with the longer process, but if there's any place in city administration where it ought to be slow and cautious, it's in this one.
For sure.
Whereas, I understand the objections with like P and Z and Action, the people trying to, but the people that are applying here, frankly, they don't have a drum beating on them like a developer. And, if we make a mistake that the public objects to, because we didn't have public hearings or we didn't ask the right questions, and then it blows up on us, I'd rather take more time here.
Well, and the final thing I'll say is if you're an applicant and you really kind of know the system and know the law, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna, and even if you don't, but you're kind of a savvy developer or savvy owner, you're gonna call a Michael, or you're gonna call a Dalton or even a Kim and say, hey, what do I need to do? You're gonna get an application. You're gonna probably talk to staff 2 or 3 times in your development of the application. You're gonna submit it, and frankly, if it's really a good application and you really kind of have deferred to what staff says in terms of this is what EIC wants to see, this is what they've done in the past, no guarantees, of course. Once you submit that and you get on the agenda, you really are gonna have 60 days, because it's gonna go to y'all. Odds are, staff has read the room right, and it's gonna be in that process, and so in other words, if you've done your homework up front and really submit a buttoned-up application, it's really not gonna be that long of a process. Probably, it's gonna be 60 days of a couple meetings of y'all, and then, of course, go to council, but council is gonna be aware of it as well, because we tell them what's coming at least, not me.
So,
This is just out of the blue, but, okay, so you have the initial presentation, then if we like it, we call for a public hearing, we have the public hearing, then we vote. So that's 2 meetings. Is it, and I know some funding agreements are more comprehensive than others. Some seem to be pretty straightforward. Others maybe need to be more customized depending on the type of the project. But is there a world in which the straightforward funding agreements could somehow be sent out via email and people vote electronically without holding a public meeting, or it has to be at a scheduled
That's the
deal?
It's
whole.
gotta be in here, yeah.
anything over $10,000 for EIC also requires a 60-day waiting period after the date of the first publication in the newspaper before the money can be spent. And so you need, even as quickly as like you have the meeting to hear it and say, okay, let's call a public hearing. If the very next day we got it in the paper, we couldn't legally spend $1 of that money for 60 days. And so, I mean, I get it. If we could speed them up.
What if we just explained the necessary steps, the legally necessary steps, and said these meetings, these, one or more of these processes may be held in conjunction or may be within, 3 separate meetings, and just say that it could go either way.
We could spell it out much
Just
like
say
P and Z
you've got to
does.
have, it will be
right?
presented, it will go to, a public hearing and then funding agreement if, as it progresses. There may be an overlap and it may be in 3 separate meetings depending on the process.
Yes, we can. I'm reluctant about doing like, if it's a simple funding agreement, we
No,
can do
I
it in 2
wouldn't say
meetings because
that.
they're all gonna go like, hey, my 65-page application's super simple and you
No,
guys are slow.
I wouldn't put that in the notes. I would
Okay.
just say that it's a possibility for things to happen concurrently.
Yeah.
Or to be in 3 separate meetings, that you just have to be aware that it could go either way. But just to know that those are the things, and that it could, that it could run concurrent or not run concurrent.
Could add that to the process, right?
Yeah.
Roadmap.
Mm-hmm.
So have you had the experience where you spend a lot of time on doing a funding agreement and then the EIC board said, this is a no-go?
No, I haven't. No, I've
It would
spent
be more specific items, right, that need to be tweaked.
years talking to folks about projects that they're gonna do and then they don't do them, right?
More on
That's
that
half
side,
of my
yeah.
life. when it gets to y'all, you know, it's, okay, my project doesn't work unless I get X funding, right? So typically we move that along. And honestly, you know, if the project sucks, I hate to say it that way, but if it's a horrible idea,
Won't come here.
you guys don't see it.
Yeah.
And that's how I've done this my entire life. And part of it is a delegation to staff that we're gonna know the difference between this is a project that is horrible and this is a project, if it's even quasi, you know, I don't know, that's gonna come to y'all. It will. But we will do in the past, we have done everything we can to vet that to where this application isn't gonna be a disaster for both the applicant and the board, because you're having to say no to some entity. And I mean, so I guess some of that can't be avoided.
It sounded like that was a concern of yours, that Mike spending time on a funding agreement before the public hearing.
To me, we don't have to. We can get them all set up, and I think in likelihood, 90% of them are gonna pass. I think there are gonna be areas where it's gonna change based on the public hearing, and so you can't, I mean, sometimes we do approve them pending
Yeah,
these
tweak.
changes, right? But I also don't like putting that on, because then we're gonna come back again with another amended version, and did that amended version meet with exactly what you're talking about? Or we have the approval, and then we draft up the funding agreement based on that approval. We can do either way. It's the purview of the body. Right now, if we keep it the way it is, we will have funding agreements to you at the public hearings,
The way it is on the application.
right now.
I mean, I think that everything that we're saying is there's times when that would make sense and there's times when that wouldn't make sense. Based on what the public might feel about the project, or based on how straightforward it is, or based on what you hear from us, you might think, ooh, there were some members that kind of were questioning this. I don't know what's, you know, I mean, but I think, or honestly, what does Mike's timeline look like? He's drafting ordinances for council all the time, and he's looking at legal issues all the time. Maybe he's got time to do it, and maybe he needs a little more time to draft something.
I could always give Mr. Hayes more time, and then his
I was
life
gonna say, it
would
doesn't
be.
have to be an either or did you wanna spell it out in this?
As much as you can't spell it out, that's what I would prefer to do. I understand that in some of these instances, that has created issues where you get approached by an applicant because they don't like the way the process goes. I think by and large, that's not the case, right? And I think there needs to be some latitude in
And
there.
we need to say when possible, you know?
So.
If you're too explicit in it, it just becomes more bureaucratic than not, you know? That's
It
my
sounds like
take on it.
maybe the two people that approached you came about their issues. Maybe if we just have a more formalized process for responding to initial requests from the GO team would help alleviate some of that. Because if the GO team meets, says, hey, listen, the project is so, here's what we think you need to do, and here's the formal process that we'll have for responding to your request, maybe that'll help alleviate it, because I certainly think that the process we have now is pretty good, because we shouldn't be hearing every request that just comes through the door, because what's the point of that? Then we don't need the GO team. But if we have a GO team to kind of do the first review, then maybe that's all we need, just a formalized process to respond to initial requests, so that there's no confusion from the applicant about what they need to do, or don't need to proceed further because it doesn't meet some particular rule or regulation.
I will put it this way, same as we do all the time. As a body, give us direction. I've got individual direction, and I don't take individual direction, and I love them all. They're great. We can try and coalesce it all, and I think we can work towards
Okay.
what you guys are wanting to do.
Okay.
Um,
How do y'all feel about just laying out, first of all, going back to what Michael was just talking about, laying out the process? This is the process. It's going to be brought forward, and as the applicant, you're gonna have a chance to present. A decision will be made as to a public hearing. And if the public hearing, if it passes, then a funding agreement will be drafted. This process can, steps 2 and 3 of this process can happen concurrently or can happen at separate meetings. I mean, that's not gonna change. That's a legal process, right? yes, we could try and like squeeze a public hearing in for the first. I feel like we want to hear it before the public hearing.
You have to call, you as the board have to call the public
And
hearing.
then we have, so we
It
have to
cannot-
hear it
I
first.
don't know
no matter
about
what.
what Mr. Appel's saying about, I mean, that might be the case where you could vote electronically, I don't know.
Yeah,
We'd have
so
to
we're
look at
gonna
that.
have, minimum 2 meetings, and hopefully, it's not gonna be a maximum of 3 meetings if we need changes to the public hearing, substantive changes, but really, though, we have to follow 3 steps. Steps 2 and 3 can happen concurrently or not. It's gonna be specific to so many factors, but just, it may be, those are the steps, right?
Right, so it doesn't have to be in here that it will be, that the funding agreement will be at the public hearing.
Right.
But you would know after the presentation, we could go into executive session, and there would be a conversation at that point, are we ready to proceed forward with a funding agreement? Because it may be one of those presentations that we go, yes, this is it, we're all on board for it. And then you would know that even as we call the public hearing, kind of like with the light for Avery, I think everybody was like, yeah, that needs to happen, there needs to be a light there. And so the funding agreement could come at the same time as the public hearing. I think the city staff would have a really good feel after the first presentation, if we go into an executive session to have a conversation about it, what that would look, that it's a true, yes, let's go, or no, we have more questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, in all cases, whatever happens with the Go team, it'll either come, it just comes as a recommendation. And then that
So-
application is going forward to the EIC.
Does everyone feel okay saying that the Go team will make recommendations? The recommendations will be presented to EIC, recommendations and or questions will be presented or will be given to EIC, will be given to the applicant, and the applicant will come to the next meeting.
Yes.
Right now, we include it in the packet.
So, but it's gonna be spelled out in here.
We will.
And there's no going back to the Go team unless the project gets flatlined because it doesn't meet legal requirements or what, basic requirements. Then they could potentially, they're starting over in the process. If it meets legal standards, then there will be suggestions and feedback and potentially questions from the Go team that the applicant can address with EIC or not. But it's just, here are things you might consider, EIC, here are things you might consider. See
So
what
we'll
happens.
spell it out. The Go team meeting will include an invitation to the applicant to present before them. Then they can ask any questions they have, and then they leave. Go team discussion happens, and then recommendations come to y'all.
Do you want to do it that way?
Do
And
you want to?
Happy
want-
to. I mean, like you say, if there's questions to
they
be
can be
asked,
invited to the meeting, and
They
then
don't
if
have to
they
come if
can't,
they don't want
yeah,
to,
if they don't want
right.
to come, they don't come.
Yeah.
Okay.
put that in there.
So they're invited to come to the meeting, they can make their presentation and leave. Then the frank discussion, questions, feedback goes out to both board and applicant. And at the next meeting, they can expect to present. You think that clears things up for everyone? Okay.
And we
Does that
can
answer
have-
the big questions?
We can have a funding agreement drafted. I know that there's probably gonna be issues where that happens and they don't have sufficient information. James Avery, for example, is a good one, right? You all agree to the project and you think it's a good one. They don't have the donation agreement from TxDOT, so they don't meet
Draft
all
the
the
funding
requirements that
agreement.
are necessary for their funding agreement, so
We have to
it
wait.
can't, it has to
Yeah.
wait. It's not anything any of us can do anything about, it's just that, those things will wait, right? But we can have them drafted. And I mean, it won't be many, if any. I mean, like, Ms. Hammond was saying.
It just doesn't need to say in here that it doesn't need to imply in here that it's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, all it's saying is that there is gonna be a funding agreement at the public hearing. Doesn't say it's gonna be the final version of it, it's a draft.
But we don't
version.
even have to have one at a public hearing.
You don't have to have one. If y'all wanna keep it in there, we will make sure that they are all there.
I don't think we need to have it. I think, I mean, I'm speaking for myself and I need to stop and listen, but I think that we can all understand that there's gonna be times when it doesn't make sense to try and have a draft ready for a public hearing, and there may be, times also when it does make sense to have one ready, but we shouldn't lock into either one. The applicant just needs to understand, like you said, here's the roadmap. We can't tell you at the beginning of this process whether it's gonna happen at the same time or not.
Well, so I think we have enough direction to,
Are we
Yeah,
good?
Bring it back to
I
you.
think y'all have hit upon it. It's expectations, right? And that's what this document is gonna be. Michael will be able to give this to applicants and go, follow the document, and that's your ticket perhaps to funding. And I think Mrs. Hammond has a good idea that we can build in here, is that at the time of the initial application, that it comes to y'all, Go Teams looked at it, comes to y'all, you can ask staff very bluntly in executive session, we're ready to move on this, and it seems simple to us, I'm speaking for y'all. Can we do a public hearing and an agreement next time? And we'll be honest with you.
yeah, they're missing something or they're not.
Yeah, and I would say, I don't know, maybe it's a 50-50 deal. Certainly if it's a city project, those are easy. But if it's and here's an example, the James Avery Light project, that's conceptually, that's an easy project. They're just not, they weren't ready with an agreement with TxDOT, which they need, and so we had to push that. But I think that's where you consider the project, and if it's a killdeer, we're gonna tell you right off the bat, we're gonna be lucky to get you an agreement the next time. But if it's a simple project, in our mind, we'll do whatever we can do to get you a public hearing and an agreement the next meeting.
And not to add fuel to this fire, but Mike Hayes and I have talked many, many times about the economic development policy that is currently in place that includes the city of Ingram and Kerr County and is way out of
A
date.
policy for council?
For economic development projects, and we will bring that back. Because that is what's mentioned in reference to the STAR, that STAR that you talked about, like other incentive policies maybe, applying. There are things that need to change in addition to this. A lot of those can be included into this application. That would be like, here's the matrix, or here's the metrics for the business enterprise application, right? This many jobs get you this, right? That's a fairly outdated document, and so we need to make changes to that.
Okay. All right, more fun. Okay, sorry to keep you guys so long. Is there any other
This
suggestions?
is great. We really appreciate it. It helps a lot to clarify some of this, because it is an
It's
interesting
hard,
spot,
it's
being in the middle.
all right.
Well, it's
see
gotta
that.
be hard for an applicant. I don't know about everybody else, but I've had trouble with how the process works since I was appointed.
Yeah.
And this is as close as I've gotten to understanding it. And now I know why it's fuzzy.
Yes, sir.
It just is.
I don't know about you guys, but I need to go make some dinner, so
Yeah.
at 5:48, our meeting is adjourned. Thank y'all. Thanks for